Cataclysm's origins go all the way back to 2010. An indie developer known as Wales loved the mechanical depth of classic roguelikes like NetHack and Dwarf Fortress, but he was tired of most of them being set in some generic medieval fantasy world. He wanted to combine that formula together with the zombie apocalypse instead. So in 2010, he started building a game called Cataclysm. It was entirely text-based. Your character was an @ symbol, zombies were the letter Z. Wales posted it on the Dwarf Fortress forums and people really connected with it. But by 2012, between work and getting married, he just didn't have the time for it anymore, and he announced he was stepping away from the project. Before he left, he did something that will change everything. He open-sourced the entire game on GitHub, completely free for anyone to use. And that's exactly where the story really begins. The game was so addictive that its community didn't want to let it die. In early 2013, a developer from the community known as the Darkling Wolf grabbed the code and forked it into a brand new project. That fork became Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead, or CDDA for short. Soon, 2 more developers joined in. Together, they formed an unofficial community organization called Clever Raven to lead the project. Under their leadership, the game would grow massively, but that growth would come at a cost the community itself would end up paying. What makes CDDA so absurdly complex is that it's fully open source. Any programmer, modder, or even a random player can contribute code. You submit a pull request on GitHub, the core team reviews it, and if it makes sense, it goes in. The game's experimental build updates automatically several times a day. That's exactly why the game is packed with such bizarre, hyper-specific detail. A player who is a real-life auto mechanic decides the engine mechanics aren't realistic enough, so he writes the code himself. A chemistry student rebuilds the entire drug synthesis system from scratch because, in his words, that's not how it actually works. To date, over 1,000 different people have contributed code directly to the game. That extreme realism is really the one thing that makes CDDA special. You can live out whatever zombie apocalypse scenario you've dreamed up with total realism. Cataclysm gives you that. Unlike Project Zomboid, which focuses on playability, CDDA focuses on strict realism. Every tiny detail has been thought through. One of my favorite examples, when you loot a house, you find exactly what you'd actually find in a real house. Whatever you'd stumble across walking into someone's home in real life is what's waiting for you here. Kitchen knives, sofas, appliances, everything. Cataclysm is the only game where you can play out exactly what's in your head. But as the years went by and development kept going, some players started arguing this obsession with realism was actually hurting the game, that it had lost the charm of the original Cataclysm. Which brings us to the next problem, the developers' controversial approach to running the project. The community drama behind Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead holds some of the biggest blow-ups that you will find in an open-source, fully collective project, which is genuinely rare in the gaming industry. So there's no commercial angle and no publisher. The game's entire direction is decided by the small core team of developers running it. Their vision is uncompromising realism and simulation pushed to the absolute extreme. That vision has repeatedly clashed with a community that just wants to have fun, sparking years of forum wars, mass bans, and eventually a full split of the game itself. One of the longest fights was over the skill rust mechanic. The developers reasoned that if you stop practicing a real-world skill for long enough, you get worse at it. So they added code that made character skills randomly decay over time. Players hated the idea of fighting off zombies while also watching their archery or electronic skill quietly rot away, and they revolted, saying the game had turned from fun into a chore. The dev team pushed back even harder. Hundreds of players got banned from the forums during this fight. Eventually, a toggle to switch the mechanic on or off got added as a forced compromise, but the trust between the community and the developers never really recovered. Another major blowup came from stripping out the game's fantastical fun elements in the name of realism. In its early years, the game was full of pop culture references, wacky mutations, giant lab robots, and unbalanced but hilarious weapons. The new dev team's seriousness and realism filter didn't leave room for any of it. Since it didn't fit the game's sci-fi logic, all of it got ripped out, and the community basically declared the developers enemies of fun. Reddit and the Discord servers filled up with people arguing the game was being deliberately made boring and bureaucratic. Right on the heels of that came the Pocket System overhaul, which completely upended inventory management and was for a lot of players the final straw. In older versions, you just checked your bag's total liter capacity and crammed in whatever fit. The developers changed that so that clothing and bags now have individually sized pockets, just like real life. Under the new system, you could own a 20-liter backpack, but if none of its individual pockets were big enough, you literally couldn't fit a long rifle or a katana inside. This kind of micromanagement, which made it physically impossible to stuff 10 screwdrivers into your pants pockets, triggered thousands of angry comments on Reddit. The developers defended it by pointing out that, realistically, nobody's shoving giant tools into their pants pockets either. The most concrete result of all these endless clashes was the birth of an entire alternate fork called Bright Knights. A group of developers and modders took the source code and split the project in two. In this new version, they ripped out the mechanics players found most exhausting, skill rust, the overcomplicated pocket system, all of it, and instead leaned the game further into sci-fi, combat, cyberbionic implants, and old-school roguelike fun. Even today, the Cataclysm community is split down the middle between these two camps. While the developers were growing the game, they were also building out a genuinely solid sci-fi horror backstory behind the scenes. You piece it together over time by hacking computers in hidden labs. Here's the short version. In the 1990s, a vehicle from a parallel universe crash lands in rural America. The government sets up an ultra-secret agency called Zedra to study it. Scientists eventually figure out how to open portals between dimensions, and through one of them, they bring back something codenamed XE-037, a black liquid-like organism players nicknamed the Blob. This liquid can reanimate dead cells and trigger mutations. What Zedra doesn't realize is that it is actually a tiny fragment of a massive interdimensional hive mind. The liquid leaks out of the lab and works its way into the world's groundwater. Everyone gets infected without even knowing it. Then, one day, the virus activates all at once. Everyone who dies starts coming back as a zombie. At the same time, the dimensional rifts start tearing open, and Lovecraftian horrors, aliens, and giant monster insects start pouring into the world. Humanity collapses within days. That's another thing that sets Cataclysm apart from every other zombie game. It has its own completely original mythology. It is basically what you would get if you mashed together Venom, The Last of Us, and Gravity Falls. But the developers clearly noticed people missed the classic zombie vibe too, so they added a classic zombies mode that you can toggle on. The moment you start a new game, you're hit with thousands of scenarios, characters, and other options. You can pick your profession, your starting skills, even your character's personality traits. Once you've made your choices, you're dropped into the world. Your first goal is dead simple: find food, water, and shelter. Finding food alone is its own entire system. Sure, you can find canned food, but do you have a can opener? You can hunt an animal, but do you actually know how to clean and prep it? Want to cook? You need fire. Fire needs fuel. Fuel needs the right tool to gather. Eat raw meat and you risk food poisoning. Even just not starving to death means thinking through a dozen different problems. The real complexity kicks in with the health system. Unlike Project Zomboid, where it's basically I'm hurt, slap a bandage on it, here, every part of your body is tracked separately. Hurt your leg and you slow down. Break your arm and you lose the use of that hand. You can catch an infection, but which kind? Bacterial or viral? They need completely different treatments. Take the wrong antibiotic at the wrong dose, and instead of getting better, you actually get worse. Take a painkiller, and you won't feel the pain, but that makes you reckless, and you can end up making things worse without even realizing it. Finding shelter isn't as simple as it sounds either. You find a house, fine, but is it actually safe? Sleep there without barricading the windows, and zombies will just walk right in. No heat source, and you will freeze overnight. Not enough storage, and you can't hold onto the resources that you've gathered. Eventually, you will need to build an actual base, fence it in, hook up a generator, set up a farm. The vehicle system is a whole different beast. Say you find a car on the street. You can't just hop in and drive off. First, you need to check if it even runs. Is the battery charged? Is there fuel? Is the engine intact? And finally, the game mechanic that really raises the bar and sets Cataclysm apart from Project Zomboid: NPCs. You can run into other survivors in the world, trade with them, recruit them, even build a small community together. Every NPC has their own personality, their own needs, and their own trust level toward you. Treat someone badly or break a promise, and that relationship falls apart. Being a leader people actually trust becomes its own skill inside the game. This is actually a feature the Project Zomboid developers once said that they would add, and never did. They're still considering it. Hopefully, they get around to it someday. Maybe they'll take a little inspiration from Cataclysm. As the game kept growing, the team needed a real way to get big features done. Up to this point, CDDA was only getting a few hundred downloads a month, but as the community grew, that jumped to a few thousand a month. That momentum gave the team the confidence to take the next step, a Kickstarter campaign. On June 21st, 2013, Clever Raven launched a Kickstarter for Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. It seemed a little confusing at first. The game was already free, open to everyone, and had plenty of volunteer contributors. But the goal wasn't to charge people for work that was already being done for free. The real problem was that since the game was pushing out several experimental updates a day, it was nearly impossible for anyone to sit down and actually finish big long-term features. What the team needed was someone they could trust to just get major features done. For that job, they brought in Ethan Kaminsky, an indie developer from the CDDA community. The goal was to raise $7,000 to fund him working full-time for 3 months. The promised features included a full tile set graphics overhaul for players who weren't fans of ASCII, a Z-level system letting different floors of the map interact with each other, and a modern world manager. If they raised more, stretch goals included a scenario editor, a stealth and line-of-sight system, and a full rewrite of the inventory system. The campaign did way better than expected. It hit half its goal in just 3 days and was fully funded within a week. It ultimately raised $9,492 total, clearing a stretch goal and locking in 3.5 months of guaranteed development. Shortly after the campaign finished, the team completely lost contact with Ethan Kaminsky. The guy just vanished. Team members even reached out to his family to figure out what was going on, but they said they hadn't heard from him in a long time either. He disappeared entirely and never resurfaced. To this day, nobody really knows what happened to him. Fortunately, someone else from the community stepped in almost immediately, Sean McLaughlin. With a background in freelance game programming, he took over the project, and with it, both the money already raised and the pressure to actually deliver on everything that had been promised. The features in the Kickstarter project did eventually make it into the game. The tile set graphics system shipped with version 0.8, and the world manager arrived in version 0.9. Cataclysm was built in C++. What really separates it from games built on engines like Unity or Unreal is that the developers wrote almost everything themselves entirely from scratch. The AI driving thousands of zombies, the weight and volume calculations for every single object on the map, the ballistic trajectories of bullets factoring in wind and obstacles, all of it runs without a massive performance hit, purely thanks to this custom C++ foundation. But the real genius of the project is its JSON data system, which lets people who don't even know how to code contribute to the game. The developers completely separated the game's core engine, the C++ side, from its content. Every item, weapon, zombie type, piece of clothing, and recipe in the game is really just a simple text file written in JSON. So if you want to add, say, a new spiked bat to the game, you don't need to be a professional programmer. You just open a text file and define a few lines. The item's name, its weight, how much damage it does, and what materials are needed to craft it. The game's original graphics are made entirely of ASCII characters, like classic roguelike or Dwarf Fortress. At first, it feels like staring at raw computer code, but once it clicks, your brain starts processing it almost automatically, like reading The Matrix. It's a style that leaves everything up to your imagination, closer to reading a book than looking at a picture. The developers knew ASCII was scaring off new players. Once the tileset system was coded in, the community started a massive pixel art movement on the forums. Volunteers hand-drew individual 2D sprites for thousands of items, creatures, clothing pieces, vehicle parts, and terrain tiles. Today, when you download the game, it opens straight into these graphics by default. While the visuals were getting this glow up in the community's hands, sound, arguably just as important to the game's atmosphere, went through a similar journey. Just like the original graphics, the earliest versions of Cataclysm had no sound at all. You were surviving in complete silence with nothing but text and letters around you. So the community decided to fix it themselves. Sound designers and volunteers came together to put out massive community-made sound packs, hoping to pull in more players. And that's the story of CDDA, a project that was abandoned, turned into a massive simulation by the hands of thousands of volunteers, split in two by management crises, and somehow still growing to this day. See you in the next video.